The university's funding email had made this job sound like the perfect assignment. 3 months of weather research in Alaska, good pay, and enough distance from everything else to focus only on collecting data without interruptions. I had packed my gear with real excitement, imagining the discoveries that could come from such untouched conditions. Now, as I stepped out of the supply truck that had carried me the last 30 miles from the nearest town, I began questioning every choice that had brought me here. The research station crouched against the endless white like a block of metal, its black walls standing out sharply against the snow that stretched in every direction. There were no trees, no hills, no features at all, just flat snow that seemed to swallow both sound and distance. The wind cut straight through my heavy coat like the fabric wasn't even there, and I realized how poorly I had prepared for real cold. Daniel Martinez, I presume. The voice came from a man who stepped out of the station's main door. He looked like the land itself had shaped him. Lined face, graying beard, and eyes that carried the steady weight of long years. David Miller. I run this place. I shifted my duffel bag higher and walked toward him, trying not to rush. The cold bit at every patch of exposed skin, making my nose run and my eyes sting. Thanks for having me. The university said you could use some help with atmospheric readings. David shook my hand, short but firm. Come on, let's get you inside before you freeze to death on your first day. The inside air hit me like a wall, stale, heated, and almost too warm. Narrow halls lined with pipes and wiring passed by rooms that looked like labs, storage, and small living quarters. Every window was hidden behind thick, dark curtains, blocking out the outside completely. It felt closed in, almost like being sealed inside a submarine. Drop your gear here. David opened a small room with a narrow bed, a desk, and barely enough floor space to move. Not fancy, but it's warm, and the walls are solid. I set down my bag and followed him back into the hall. The place seemed muffled, our steps and voices swallowed into the walls. Other doors stayed closed as we walked, and I found myself wondering how many people were actually stationed here. Before you settle, you need to hear the rules, David said, his tone suddenly heavier. These aren't suggestions. They're survival rules. Breaking them can kill you. His dramatic wording almost made me laugh, but his face was too serious. I had expected the usual safety talk about equipment and emergencies. This sounded like something else. First rule, never look outside between 11:11 and 3:33. Doesn't matter if you hear something. Doesn't matter if you think you see something. Those curtains stay shut, no peeking. I started to ask what could be so dangerous about simply looking, but he pressed on. Second, never answer knocking on the door at night. If someone knocks after dark, you ignore it completely. No exceptions, no matter what you think you hear. My scientific brain pushed for explanations. What kind of station ran with rules like these? Third, every Monday at exactly 5 p.m., we do a full supply count. Every item checked, every area covered. Fourth, if you see any holes in the ice that weren't there before, you report it immediately. Fifth, if staff start acting strange or saying odd things, you tell me right away. Sixth, never go outside after dark, not for any reason. Doesn't matter if it's equipment, an emergency, or a fire. Once the sun sets, this building stays shut until sunrise. The list of rules hung between us like a warning. I tried to make sense of them, searching for logical reasons behind what sounded like superstitions. Maybe isolation and the extreme environment had made people cautious to the point of paranoia. I know how they sound, David said, as if reading my thoughts. You think this is nonsense? The kind of fear that comes from too much time alone out here. Every newcomer thinks that. Before I could reply, footsteps came from deeper down the hall. A woman appeared, middle-aged, practical, wearing the same heavy indoor clothes everyone seemed to wear here. "Sarah Johnson," she said with a short nod. "How much have you told him?" "Just finished the rules," David answered. Sarah's face grew stern. "Good. Let me make this clear, Daniel. Those rules David gave you aren't optional. They're not old protocols or silly fears. People who break them don't come back." The way she said it, so matter-of-fact, sent an uneasy chill through me. These weren't dramatic or foolish people. They seemed calm, professional, experienced. Yet here they were, talking about curtains and knocking sounds as if they were life and death. "I get that you're skeptical," Sarah went on. "Everyone is at first. But doubt won't save you if you decide to test the rules. Out here, the Arctic doesn't care about your science or your logic.
Even if a customer begs, threatens, or offers cash. Rule 3. If the lights blink 3 times, head to the back room and wait exactly 7 minutes before coming back. Mark looked doubtful. These sound like urban legends or horror movie stuff. Rule 4, I said, ignoring him, is serious. When customers come in acting off, walking weird, talking flat, or just seeming wrong, they're not themselves anymore. Don't talk to them. Don't look at them. And don't let them touch you. Not themselves, Mark repeated, laughing. What's that even supposed to mean? It means exactly what I said, I told him flatly. You'll get it when you see it. As the night went on, I showed him how to clean the coffee station, run inventory, and work the register. Between tasks, I added more rules and store procedures. Each time he looked more dismissive. "So let me get this straight," he said as I explained the 11 p.m. lockup. "Every night at exactly 11, we have to lock the front doors even if there are still shoppers inside." "Yes," I said. "At 10:58 we warn them. Stragglers are walked out the employee exit. And this is real policy? Forcing customers out or locking them in?" "It's not locking them in, it's locking other things out," I said. "And yes, it's policy. Thomas will confirm." Mark shook his head. "This is straight out of a horror movie. Next you'll tell me about full moons or not feeding things after midnight." I sighed. Emma always listened better than this grown man. Even Jacob knew when it was serious. "Look," I said, "I've got 2 kids. Emma and Jacob don't have anyone else. I follow these rules because I want to come home to them. Whether you believe the reasons or not, just follow the procedures. That's all I'm asking." Mark's face softened at the mention of my kids, though the doubt was still there. At 9:45, the bell above the door rang as a customer walked in. I instantly recognized the tall figure in the black hoodie. Mark stiffened beside me, his hand inching toward the phone. "It's okay," I said quietly, moving toward the coffee machine. I poured a large black coffee, set it on the counter, and didn't ring it up. The tall man gave a small nod and took the coffee. I could feel Mark watching as the man walked to the far corner of the store and slowly seemed to fade into the shadows. "What was that?" Mark whispered. "Why didn't you check him out?" "That's William," I said. "He helps with problems around here. The free coffee is just a courtesy." "Helps with what problems?" Mark asked quickly. "The kind that make the rules necessary," I answered. For the rest of our shift, Mark kept learning the register system and stocking shelves. William stayed in his corner, sometimes moving to another spot in the store, but he never spoke a word. When our shift was almost done, the tall man put his empty cup on the counter and walked out without saying anything. "That guy creeps me out," Mark muttered, once William had gone. "And all these rules. I've done night shifts before." Yeah, weird people come in sometimes, but there's nothing supernatural about it. I finished counting my drawer and looked him in the eye. I'm not asking you to believe in ghosts. I'm asking you to follow the procedures that have kept workers alive here. Mark laughed, shaking his head. Right. Disappearances, monsters, and whatever else. Look, I get that you want the night to feel spooky, but I'm too old for ghost stories. As we left and walked to our cars, I felt a heavy knot of worry in my stomach. I had seen this kind of attitude before, and it never ended well. People who ignored the rules didn't usually last at the stop and go. Just be careful, okay? I said when we reached the lot. And remember, never work alone. Sure thing, boss, Mark replied, giving me a mock salute. I'll check for monsters under the cash register, too. I watched him drive away, that knot in my stomach twisting tighter. I needed to pick up Emma and Jacob from my neighbor's house, get them to bed, and try to sleep before another long night tomorrow. As I started my car, I couldn't shake the thought that Mark's training hadn't sunk in. Not because I hadn't tried, but because he wouldn't listen. Some people had to learn the hard way. I only hoped Mark would survive that lesson. 3 days passed since his first shift, and I was already drained from his constant dismissal of everything I told him. Tonight was no better as I watched him carelessly tossing energy drink cans onto the shelf instead of stacking them properly. You'll break one if you keep throwing them, I said, fixing his sloppy work. Mark shrugged. They're cans. They'll be fine. I bit down on a sharper reply. My kid's babysitter had called out sick, and I had to leave Emma and Jacob at my mom's across town. The extra drive left me with barely 4 hours of sleep, and my patience was running out. Let's go over Rule 2 again, I said as I walked toward the liquor section.
The first sound came from above my room, a slow, dragging scrape, like something heavy sliding across the roof. I sat up, straining to hear. The scrape moved side to side, then stopped. My mind went straight to possible causes. Ice shifting on the roof, the metal frame settling with temperature changes, wind pushing debris across the surface, all logical for a building in such conditions. Then came the steps, not light animals scurrying or random chunks of ice falling. These were heavy, even footsteps that circled the station in a steady pattern. Each thud shook the frame enough to make my bed tremble. The sound was too precise, too intentional to be natural. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stepped toward the covered window. My fingers brushed the edge of the thick blanket before David's warning came back sharp in my mind. Never look outside between 11:11 and 3:33. Breaking them can get you killed. The logical part of my mind kept insisting this was just the kind of strange behavior that came from being cut off too long. Whatever was outside could be studied, recorded, and explained with proper research. Knowledge was always better than fear and superstition, yet my hand froze just inches from the heavy curtain. The footsteps made a full circle around the station and began again, this time with that scraping noise mixed in. Something was clearly moving around the outside in a steady loop, and the force of it was strong enough to shake through the walls into my room. I placed my palm against the metal and felt each step as a solid vibration. By midnight, the sounds grew worse. The scraping turned harsher, like claws tearing at the building itself. The footsteps sped up, circling faster with a strange sense of purpose. Then came a sound that made my entire body tense. A howl. It wasn't the call of wolves or the whistle of wind slipping through steel. It was deeper, rawer, carrying an unnatural tone that seemed to skip past my ears and settle straight inside my chest. The pitch rose and fell in ways that felt disturbingly close to language, though not one I could recognize. I pressed my hands to my ears, desperate to shut it out. But the noise seemed to sink through skin and bone. The howling kept coming in waves, sometimes faint, sometimes so close it felt like the source was standing outside my window. Then the knocking began, steady, deliberate taps at what sounded like the main door, not frantic pounding for help, but patient, rhythmic raps. Knock, knock, knock. A pause, then the pattern again. I heard movement in the hallway outside, quiet steps. Then Sarah's whisper, faint and strained. It's just the wind. We all know it's just the wind, but her voice carried no belief at all. The knocking carried on, steady and mechanical, for what felt like 20 endless minutes. All the while the scraping and circling footsteps never stopped. It became clear that more than one thing was outside. Several shapes were moving at once, surrounding the station. Then the knocking shifted. No longer just at the main entrance. It now came from the side, then the back, then another wall. Something was moving around, checking each door in every possible entry point. The calm rhythm grew louder, faster, angrier, the sound of something trying different ways in with growing intent. Each new location brought the noise closer to my room, and I realized that if I had looked out, I would have been only a few feet away from whatever made the sound. I buried my head under my pillow, but the knocking carried straight through the fabric. The howling returned between rounds, sometimes spiking so high my teeth ached from the vibration. The station shook under the constant testing, as if massive bodies circled, scraping and pushing at the metal. My mind kept scrambling for answers. Wild animals searching for warmth, shifting ice, even weather events. But the organized nature of it, the testing of every door in a clear pattern, the deliberate way they circled us, none of it fit. Hours dragged on in this storm of sound. I watched my watch face tick from midnight to 1, then 2, then 3. The noises never faded, never broke, never slowed. Whatever was outside had strength and patience that felt inhuman. Then at exactly 3:33, it all stopped. The silence was sudden and absolute, so complete my ears rang in the emptiness. No fading footsteps, no retreating howls. One moment the station shook with noise, the next it was still. I stayed frozen, straining for any sound at all, but only the steady hum of the heating system and the quiet buzz of electrical lines remained. The same silence that had unsettled me earlier now felt like a gift. I couldn't sleep. I lay there stiff, running the night's events over and over, searching for reasons. Each idea collapsed against the fact that the behavior had been organized, intelligent, and deliberate. This was no random wildlife pattern or storm noise. Something had walked our perimeter, studied our defenses, and revealed abilities that shattered everything I thought I knew about Arctic life. When daylight finally leaked through the cracks around the curtains, I got up quickly, dressed, and went to the kitchen. My legs trembled, and I realized I'd been holding every muscle tense for hours. Sarah was already there, pouring coffee with steady hands. She looked worn but not frightened, as if the night's horrors had been routine. "Sleep well?" she asked without looking up. "Not exactly." "Did you hear those noises last night?" "What noises?" Her voice was carefully even. I studied her, unsure if she truly didn't know or was just refusing to say. Her whispered words about wind told me she had heard the same things. "Nothing, I guess. Probably just the building settling." She handed me a mug and nodded. "Arctic nights take some getting used to." After breakfast, I needed air and distance. The night had felt unreal, and I wanted the clarity of daylight to ground me. I dressed in full gear and stepped outside for the first time since arriving. The cold hit hard, but the clear sky and bright sun lit up the endless snow. The sight was blinding in its purity, stretching forever with no features, but after the sealed station, it felt freeing. I told myself I was checking the building's layout, but in truth I was looking for signs of the night's activity. What I found froze my blood. Huge marks pressed deep into the snow circled the station. Not scattered prints like normal animals, but deliberate heavy indentations in a clear loop. Each impression was massive, nearly 3 feet across, sunk so deep they had broken the frozen ground beneath the snow. I knelt by one, trying to trace its shape. Roughly round, uneven, with claw-like lines stretching from the edges. Whatever had made it was beyond the size and weight of any creature I knew of in the Arctic. The trail circled the entire building, exactly as I had followed the sounds the night before. Around the doors, the windows, every point of entry. In several places, the siding of the building was scored with long gouges, the same scraping I had heard. Find something worth noting? I spun around to see David watching me, his face grim but not surprised. These tracks, I said, pointing. What kind of animal leaves prints like this? He studied the marks with the look of someone already familiar with them. His lack of shock was worse than the prints themselves. Some things are better left uninvestigated, he said at last. You'd be wise to remember that. But the size of these impressions, I know what size they are. David's tone shut down the conversation instantly. I also know that asking too many questions about them doesn't end well. He walked away, leaving me standing there with proof that tore apart everything I thought I knew about this place. The tracks were real, solid evidence that something far beyond normal had been outside our station. Yet David's reaction made it clear that even admitting this truth was somehow dangerous. I stayed out another hour, studying the huge impressions, measuring their distance apart, trying to invent any explanation that could make sense. But as the morning wore on and the sun rose higher, the prints softened, fading into the warming snow. By midday they would vanish, leaving me with nothing but memory and the growing belief that the rules I'd thought of as paranoia might be the only thing keeping us safe from something I couldn't begin to understand. The rest of Monday slipped past in a blur of forced routine that felt thin and fragile. After David's warning about the tracks, I buried myself in work, setting up my atmospheric equipment and reviewing the station's protocols for data. The tasks were grounding: numbers, procedures, measurable facts. Things my training had prepared me for. Things that made sense. At exactly 5 o'clock, David's voice came through the intercom. Monday supply check. Everyone to your stations. I followed Sarah into the main storage room, where she handed me a clipboard filled with inventory sheets. The process was exact and detailed, counting every cannon bag, checking dates, comparing numbers with the master list. Sarah moved with steady rhythm, reading off items as I wrote them down. Canned tomatoes, 12, dried beans, 8 bags, pasta, 15 boxes. Her voice carried the dull cadence of long practice. I was halfway through marking the canned goods when my pen froze. Sarah, what's this? I pointed at a can in the trash near the shelves. The label was clear: premium cat food, salmon flavor. That's strange. Sarah picked it up, turning it in her hand. We don't have cats. I scanned the manifest on my clipboard, dragging my finger down the list of items delivered to the station. There was no pet food at all. The can wasn't old. The label was bright, almost new, as if someone had eaten it recently. Maybe it slipped in with a personal order, I suggested. Sarah set the can aside, but I noticed her glancing back at it more than once, her face carrying the same cautious unease I'd seen when she spoke about the rules. 20 minutes later, we uncovered something worse. Daniel, come look. Sarah was crouched behind a stack of crates in the far corner. I walked over and froze. 3 full bags of dry cat food sat on the floor. Each was 20 pounds, sealed, with price tags showing they'd been bought just weeks ago. These aren't on the list either, she said quietly. I flipped through the sheets again, searching for anything close. Misfiled supplies, mislabeled items, but found nothing. Could someone have ordered them privately? I asked. All orders go through David. Nothing arrives without being recorded. Sarah's voice was tight, edged with worry that made my stomach knot. These showed up where they don't belong. We finished the inventory in silence. The pet food sat there, wrong and unexplained, like evidence of something we weren't ready to face. When the count was done, I noticed Sarah didn't mark the items down anywhere on the forms. Later, I found Thomas in the meteorology room, a cramped space full of monitors and computers. He was standing motionless at a window covered from the inside, hands at his sides, back to me. Thomas, we found something odd during supply check, I said. No answer. There's cat food in storage. Several things. None of it's on record. He didn't move. The only noise was the hum of machines and the low drone of the heaters. Thomas. Finally he turned, painfully slow, as if waking from a heavy dream. His eyes met mine, but his look was strange. Not recognition, not confusion, something I couldn't define. He stared without blinking for what felt like a minute straight. Not a pause of thought, but a cold, fixed stare that made me want to step back. His eyes never shifted, never twitched. They stayed locked on me with an unnatural steadiness. Then without a word, he walked out, leaving me to process what I had just seen. His behavior went far beyond awkwardness or isolation fatigue. The way he looked at me felt almost predatory, like he was examining me for a purpose I couldn't imagine. That afternoon, David's voice came again, sharp through the intercom. Everyone outside. Found something near the generator shed. I pulled on my heavy gear and stepped into the freezing air with Sarah and Thomas. The cold bit hard, the wind sharp against my face. David stood about 50 feet from the main building, near the metal shed that held backup generators and fuel. Even from far away, I saw he was staring at something on the ground. As we came closer, the shape became clear. A round hole cut into the ice, perfectly circular, 3 feet wide, its edges smooth like a machine had sliced it out. When did this show up? Sarah asked. Wasn't here this morning, David answered. I noticed it an hour ago during checks. I crouched beside it and shone my flashlight into the dark. The beam vanished into emptiness. No matter how I angled it, the light was swallowed whole. How deep is it? I asked. David was already walking back. Deep enough. Stay put. He returned with a steaming pot of water and without a word poured it into the opening. The liquid slid away into black silence. No splash, no echo, no sign of bottom. What are you doing? I asked. Holes like this call to things under the ice, he said. Boiling water keeps them from climbing through. He spoke like it was ordinary, a simple chore. The matter-of-fact way he said it made my rational mind crack a little more. I wanted to ask what things he meant, but his look warned me not to. We went back inside as the sun dropped and night routines began. Dinner was quiet, the 4 of us seated at the long table, eating reheated stew and canned vegetables. Talk was minimal, basic updates, schedules, data logs. I was discussing pressure readings with Sarah when I noticed Thomas. His fork was halfway up, loaded with food, but he had stopped mid-motion, frozen. He stared at something behind me, his face blank, his eyes fixed. "Thomas," Sarah said. No reaction. He stayed locked in place as if paused, his gaze stuck on the wall over my shoulder. His eyes didn't shift, didn't blink, just held that same mechanical look I'd seen earlier. The stillness was worse this time, like he wasn't really present at all. I turned to see what he was staring at. The wall was bare except for a few posted emergency rules and schedules. Nothing at all that should have held such a grip on him. "Thomas," Sarah said again, more firmly. She reached across the table and touched his shoulder. The second her hand made contact, Thomas jolted back, sucking in a sharp breath. His fork continued to his mouth like nothing strange had happened. "Sorry." "What?" Sarah said softly. "You were gone for a while." Thomas blinked, looking around with confusion. "Was I? I don't remember." The lack of memory was the most disturbing part. He didn't realize he'd been frozen for nearly 10 minutes. No idea of what he'd been staring at or why he'd stopped moving. After dinner, I helped with the dishes, turning over the day's events in my head. The cat food, the hole in the ice, Thomas's episodes. Each one by itself could maybe be explained. Delivery errors happened. Shifting ground could cause holes. Isolation could create odd mental effects. But together, they made a pattern that refused to fit inside any normal explanation. These weren't random problems. They felt like signs of something wrong at a deeper level. What troubled me more was how the others reacted. David's calm attitude about impossible holes. Sarah's quiet way of handling supplies that didn't belong. Thomas's blank memory lapses. None of them looked shocked. They treated every event like something they'd already learned to expect. Standing in the kitchen drying plates while Sarah set aside food for tomorrow, I felt my doubt cracking. This wasn't just isolation, stress, or the environment messing with people's minds. Something real was happening here. Something that turned research into survival, that made covering windows a life or death rule. What I had once thought of as superstition now seemed like the only sensible response to forces I couldn't explain. I woke the fourth morning with unease already sour in my mouth. The hum of the heating system filled the silence as I dressed. But something about the station's air felt different, heavy on my skin, though I couldn't say why. When I entered the kitchen, it was empty, which wasn't unusual so early. I went into the storage room to start breakfast and instantly knew something wasn't right. The shelves looked thinner than they had last night. I pulled out my notebook and checked against the list from Monday's inventory. 3 cans of beans were gone, 2 boxes of pasta missing, an entire bag of flour that should have lasted weeks. The numbers didn't fit. 4 people eating meals together couldn't account for such a drop. Worse still were the crumbs. Small trails of flour and bread, bits stretched across the floor, winding through the common areas into corners of the station no one ever used. One trail vanished under a maintenance closet door sealed with layers of heavy tape. I bent to look closer. The tape had been peeled back, just slightly, enough for something small to pass through. The crumbs ran right into the gap, as if whatever had taken the food had dragged it inside. My brain told me rodents, but the scale didn't match. Mice didn't carry away whole bags of food, and they didn't leave such neat, deliberate paths. This wasn't random scavenging. It looked like planned theft by something that knew what it was doing. Sarah found me crouched at the closet when she came to start breakfast. "What are you doing down there?" I point at the trails and explain the missing supplies. Her face grew more troubled the longer I spoke, especially when I listed the exact amounts. "That's not possible," she said, but her tone carried no certainty. "We counted everything on Monday. Look at the numbers yourself." She spent 20 minutes comparing what was left with the lists, her expression tightening as the shortages became undeniable. "Someone's been taking food at night," I said. "This is more than meals. Whole containers are missing. Nobody here would do that." I wanted to believe her, but the proof sat in front of us. Food had vanished in amounts that no single person could eat, and the crumbs proved it had been carried away, not consumed. When David came in for breakfast, I showed him the missing items and the broken tape at the closet. His response unsettled me more than the problem itself. No surprise, no worry. Just a tired look, as if this wasn't new. "These things happen sometimes," he said, like stolen food was just another chore. "Things like what?" "Someone's been taking from our supplies." David studied the crumb paths with the same detached look he'd had when staring at the giant tracks outside. No urgency, no fear of our dwindling stock. "I'll look into it," he said at last, but his tone made it clear he had no real intention of investigating anything. Thomas appeared during the conversation, emerging from his lab with the same blank, vacant look I had grown used to. He moved through the kitchen without noticing any of us, heading straight to the covered window near the dining table. He stood completely still in front of the heavy curtains for several minutes, so close that his breath fogged the fabric. His posture was rigid, arms straight at his sides, head slightly tilted as if listening to something beyond the glass. "Thomas, breakfast is ready," Sarah called. No answer. He remained frozen, fully absorbed by whatever held him there. The sight sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the Arctic air. I approached him slowly, noticing his eyes locked on one small section of the curtain. Up close, I saw his pupils were wide despite the bright kitchen lights, and his breathing was shallow and quick. "Thomas, you need to eat." My voice seemed to reach him from far away. He blinked several times, then turned toward me with the slow, disoriented movements of someone coming out of a trance. "Did you say something?" The lack of memory had become a pattern. Thomas had no idea how long he had been standing there or what had drawn his attention. He joined us at the table and ate automatically, though I caught him glancing back at the covered window over and over during the meal. Later that morning, while I was calibrating atmospheric monitoring equipment, I heard Sarah call from the storage room. "Thomas, what are you doing in here?" I found them both by the sealed maintenance closet. Thomas had his hands on the tape sealing the door, several strips partially peeled away. "I thought I heard something inside," he said, though it sounded rehearsed rather than real. Sarah looked at the disturbed tape, then at him, concern growing. "This area is sealed for safety reasons. Nobody should be opening it." Thomas nodded and walked away, but he kept glancing back at the closet. His way of handling the tape suggested he'd been trying to access it for a while, not just reacting to a sudden sound. That afternoon brought another unsettling discovery. I was organizing research notes in my room when Sarah knocked. "Can I talk to you privately?" She stepped in and closed the door, whispering, "Thomas has been asking questions about you." Personal things that don't make sense for a research station. I felt my hair stand on end. "What kind of questions?" "Your home address, details about your family, whether you live alone. He wanted to know if anyone would notice if you didn't return from this assignment." The implications chilled me. A meteorologist at an isolated station had no reason to need personal information about a colleague's life or family. Why would he ask that? I said. I don't know, Sarah said carefully, but it's not normal, even considering isolation. He's been different since you arrived, more focused on things he shouldn't care about. Her words made me uneasy. Whatever was affecting Thomas seemed to be speeding up, becoming more dangerous. That evening, I spent hours calculating our remaining food supplies. No matter how I counted, the results were alarming. At normal consumption, we had maybe 2 days' food. The next delivery wasn't for 3 weeks. Even rationing couldn't cover it. The missing food wasn't just inconvenient, it was a survival crisis no one was addressing directly. I found David in his office reviewing reports. I showed him the numbers. You realize we're running out of supplies? He looked at my calculations with the same detached focus he gave every anomaly. No urgency, no concern. Maybe you should consider leaving early, he said finally. His words hung in the air like a warning. Not advice, not concern, but something colder. The supply truck won't return for 3 weeks. There are other ways to leave. His eyes went blank, not lost in thought, but completely absent for a few seconds. When focus returned, he looked at me as if surprised to see me there. In that short moment, he was somewhere else entirely, and whatever spoke through him made every instinct in me scream. I left the office convinced the food shortage wasn't natural or accidental. Someone or something was taking our supplies on purpose, creating a crisis that would force desperate choices. The station's rules felt less like paranoia now, and more like the only protection against whatever wanted us desperate, or worse, gone. My hands shook as I pulled on every layer of winter clothing, but not from the cold. Only 1 can of beans and half a bag of rice remained. Maybe enough for breakfast if rationed. David's words about other ways to leave echoed in my mind, and that blank expression lingered. The staff's condition seemed to be worsening, and I feared staying longer would mean joining Thomas in his catatonic states, or worse, succumbing to the same force affecting him. The snowmobile sat in the equipment shed behind the main building, a heavy-duty Arctic model suited for this terrain. I had checked it the first week. Full fuel tank, emergency supplies on the back. Cold Water, the nearest town, was 15 miles away, a manageable distance if I pushed hard and didn't stop. I slipped from my room at exactly 9 p.m., moving quietly through the station. The heating system's mechanical hum masked my footsteps, and the covered windows ensured no one could see outside. David was in his office reviewing reports. Sarah was in the kitchen, organizing supplies. Thomas stood completely still in front of another covered window, lost in the same trance that claimed him every evening. None of the others noticed me slipping away. The equipment shed door opened with a loud metallic groan that seemed deafening in the quiet Arctic night. I wheeled the snowmobile outside, my breath forming clouds instantly, and the cold burned my lungs even through the thick face mask. The temperature gauge on my suit read -38 degrees. Brutal, even for the Arctic. The moment I stepped fully outside, something about the darkness changed. Not visibly, but the feeling of it shifted, sending every nerve in my body into alert. The black expanse beyond the station lights seemed alive, full of attention that hadn't been there during my short trips in daylight. I was being watched. The snowmobile engine turned over with difficulty, protesting the freezing cold. 3 tries before it caught, finally rumbling to life with a sound that echoed across the flat tundra. I checked the headlight and GPS on the handlebars. Cold water lay 15 miles straight south, a manageable distance if I kept going without stopping. I twisted the throttle and shot off into complete darkness. The headlight cut a narrow path in front of me, illuminating maybe 30 feet of snow. Beyond that, everything vanished. No horizon, no reference points, just endless black that swallowed sound and light. The snowmobile roared beneath me, but it felt small compared to the silence pressing in from all directions. 5 miles out, the GPS showed I was on track. The engine had warmed and ran smoothly, fuel still three-quarters full. At this speed, I could reach town in under an hour. Then I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. Something large shifted just beyond the headlight, keeping pace with me at nearly 40 miles per hour. I turned my head, but there was nothing there, just darkness and drifting snow. I pushed the snowmobile harder across the uneven terrain, speed climbing to 50, then 55. The movement stayed with me, perfectly keeping pace. Occasionally, I caught flashes of something massive moving parallel to my route, but every direct glance revealed only blackness. Whatever it was, it disturbed the snow enough to leave faint traces, powder displaced, shadows irregular, showing intelligence and purpose, not random wandering. 7 miles out, the presence moved ahead of me. Instead of pacing alongside, I saw something cross from left to right at the edge of my light. Fast, almost too quick to see, and gone before I could focus. My heart pounded. Whatever followed had moved around me without entering the light, covering ground faster than my snowmobile. No normal animal could do that. I pushed the throttle to max. The engine screamed, but speed climbed past 60. Snow and ice chips pelted my goggles, and the cold cut through every gap. The thing in the darkness seemed energized by my acceleration, more active, more aggressive. Flashes of movement appeared left, right, sometimes even ahead, as if it teleported through the night. 9 miles out, something brushed the back of my snowmobile. Brief, but real. Vibrations shook the frame. I twisted around to see behind me, but the darkness stayed complete. Whatever touched me had been close enough for physical contact at high speed. My hands shook on the handlebars. No earthly creature could move like that. Intelligent, relentless, invisible. 10 miles, 11, 12. The GPS showed I was halfway to Coldwater, but the thing tracking me didn't slow. If anything, it grew more aggressive. Movement flickered constantly at the edges of my vision, and I could hear faint sounds beneath the engine roar. No animals, no wind, just a deep resonance in my chest, like the howling from my first night. 13 miles. The town's faint amber glow appeared on the horizon. Streetlights, house windows, warmth, safety, normal life. The presence seemed to notice it too. Its behavior changed immediately. Frantic, aggressive. Movement at the edges of my vision quickened. 14 miles. Town lights grew clear. Street lamps, windows, the geometry of roads and buildings. Civilization, where nothing pursued you across frozen tundra. At 14 and a half miles, as the first details of cold water appeared under my headlight, something massive struck the side of my snowmobile. Forceful enough to knock me sideways, the machine skidded across ice. I fought to control it, pulling hard on the handlebars as it threatened to tip. For terrifying seconds, I slid sideways. No traction, no control. The snowmobile straightened as the first streetlight came into view. Behind me, I felt the presence withdraw, its attention lifting like a weight from my shoulders. Whatever had tracked me across 12 miles of Arctic wilderness stopped the moment civilization appeared. The engine coughed and died as I coasted into the parking lot outside Mel's 24-hour diner, the only building in cold water with lights on at 2 a.m. Neon signs flickered, warm yellow light spilling onto snow-covered asphalt. The contrast between this ordinary scene and the nightmare I had escaped made my head spin. She slid a business card across the table. Arctic Express Transportation with a phone number and address. You'll be awake in about an hour if you want pickup. I studied the worn card, smooth from frequent handling. How many other researchers had been given the same advice? How many had fled the station, needing urgent transport? Thank you, I said. This is exactly what I need. She nodded and went back to her work behind the counter, leaving me alone with my coffee and the growing realization that I had encountered something far bigger than a single isolated event. The station had been affecting people for years, and the local town had created quiet ways to help those who managed to escape. Dawn arrived slowly, gray light replacing the glow of the street lamps. I watched the town come alive. People leaving for work, children waiting for buses, dogs being walked on normal suburban streets. The ordinary routines felt almost unreal after the supernatural terror I had gone through just hours before. At 6 o'clock, I called Arctic Express Transportation. The owner, a practical-sounding man named Frank, agreed to pick me up at the diner within the hour. He didn't ask why I needed emergency transport or why I'd arrived in town so late at night. Apparently, requests like mine were common enough that no explanation was needed. Frank arrived in a heavy-duty pickup truck with tire chains and emergency gear, looking like someone who had spent decades handling Arctic conditions and difficult passengers. While he loaded my few belongings into the truck bed, I glanced back at the snowmobile I had left behind in the parking lot. "Someone will take care of that," Frank said, following my gaze. "Station equipment always gets returned eventually." The drive to Anchorage took 3 hours along roads that felt completely normal after my desperate escape through the wilderness. Frank made polite small talk about the weather and road conditions, but didn't ask a single question about my research or why I'd left. His careful discretion suggested he had transported many people away from the station, all without probing their stories. At the Anchorage airport, I bought the first flight to Seattle and then on to my university. As the plane moved down the runway, I pressed my face to the window and looked at Alaska's vast white interior. Somewhere in that endless landscape, David Miller, Sarah Johnson, and Thomas Brown were still going through their nightly routines, checking windows, monitoring supplies, and maintaining the rules that kept something unimaginable under control. The rules I had dismissed as paranoid nonsense on my first day at the station. Rules that had seemed like the product of isolation and harsh weather conditions. Rules that were actually a survival guide for existing alongside something beyond scientific understanding. As the plane climbed and the white landscape disappeared under clouds, I took out my notebook and carefully wrote down each rule exactly as David Miller had given them to me. Not because I planned to return, but because I understood that some knowledge came with a cost too dangerous to pay. The rules were not restrictions. They were the only protection between human reason and something that could destroy it completely. I never wrote an official report about what happened at the research station. No one would have believed it, and trying to explain it would have risked my sanity, forcing me to dwell on events that could not exist in a rational world. Instead, I finished my graduate degree using data from normal research sites, where the only factors were atmospheric pressure and wind patterns. But I kept the rules in my notebook, a constant reminder that some mysteries are better left alone. Some doors should remain closed, some questions should never be asked, and some places are dangerous not because of what they lack, but because of what they hide.